Hi, I'm candidate number 1, and my IGCSE sports are football, tennis, weightlifting, and golf. My coursework is on football.
I'm candidate number 2, and my IGCSE sports are netball, basketball, life saving, and weightlifting. My IGCSE coursework is on basketball.
Candidate number 1, why are you doing weight training?
For better conditioning for my golf as my sport, and to improve, to be able to hit the ball further, and better stability with play.
Candidate number 2, why are you doing weight training?
To improve general health and to turn my body.
Candidate number 1 and 2 are now starting their warm-up for their assessments. They're both on the bicycle currently. This should last for a period between 5 to 10 minutes. Candidate number 1. Candidate number 2. Candidate number 1 and 2 are now both involved in running on the treadmill. Candidate number 1 on the treadmill, and also candidate number 2 on the treadmill. What are some of the basic safety preventative measures that one can use when working in the gym?
You must make sure you always have a spotter, that the equipment is well maintained, and that there's collars on the weights tight.
When lifting weights, make sure you stabilize your core, you keep your knees bent, and maintain a good posture.
Thank you. Candidate number 1 will now perform barbell bicep curls. Candidate number 1's knees are slightly bent. Candidate's elbows are also tucked in on the sides. Thank you, candidate number 1. Candidate number 2 will now perform dumbbell bicep curls. Again, candidate number 2 is showing breathing and the importance of breathing. Thank you, candidate number 2. Candidate number 2, what are 2 important safety requirements when performing a bench press?
You must make sure you have a spotter, and you must make sure you have collars on to secure the plates.
Thank you, candidate number 2. Candidate number 1, what's going to be your role?
I'm a spotter to provide her with assistance.
Thank you very much. Candidate number 2 will now perform a bench press. Right. Thank you, candidate number 2. Candidate number 1 will now perform a bench press with the aid of a spotter. Thank you, candidate number 1. Candidate number 2 will now perform bent over rows. Candidate number 2's knees are slightly bent. She's showing good posture and good form. Thank you, candidate number 2. Candidate number 1 will now show bent over rows. Candidate number 1 is showing good posture, straight alignment of the back. Thank you, candidate number 1. The candidates are now going to demonstrate front and back squats. First, candidate number 2 with the use of a spotter. Candidate number 2 is performing back squats. She is easily lifting the weights. Thank you, candidate number 2. Candidate number 1 will now help to assist. Candidate number 1 will now perform a front squat with the use of a spotter. Thank you, candidate number 1. Candidate number 2 helps to put the back on the squat. Candidate number 2 will now perform a lat pull down using a variety of techniques, starting with the behind the neck lat pull down. Thank you. Overhead pull down. Thank you, candidate number 2. Candidate number 1 will now perform a lat pull down using a variety of techniques, beginning with the behind the back lat pull down. Thank you, candidate number 1. Next technique. Over the head lat pull down. Thank you, candidate number 1. Candidate number 2 is now beginning to perform knee flexion, hamstring curls. She's showing good technique, lifting and bringing the weight down. Quick on the way up, slower down on the way down.
Stop.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, candidate number 1. Candidate number 2 will now perform crunches as part of the assessment. You can go, candidate number 2.
First position, the next position, you can go back, right afterward, you can see that you are people side. But you know how you do it.
Thank you very much, candidate number 2. Candidate number 1 will now begin doing crunches with a twist. Thank you, candidate number 1. Candidate number 2 will now show us hip extension. Candidate number 2 is also breathing. Thank you, candidate number 2. Candidate number 1 will now perform hip extensions. Candidate number 1 is showing also good breathing. Thank you very much, candidate number 1. Candidate number 2 will now show leg press exercises. Candidate number 2 is also showing us the breathing patterns and the importance of breathing. Thank you very much, candidate number 2. Candidate number 1 will now show us a leg press. Thank you very much, candidate number 1. Candidate number 1 is now about to show us a military press with a variation of behind the neck and front. Candidate number 1 shows good posture picking up the weight. He starts with the behind the neck variation. Thank you, candidate number 1. And can we please have a front variation? Candidate number 1 is doing it in the mirror. Thank you very much, candidate number 1. Candidate number 2 will now show a variation of the shoulder press. She's going to be doing a seated machine press. Candidate number 2 is also showing us the importance of breathing in the process. Thank you, candidate number 2. Candidate number 1 will now perform a power clean. Candidate number 2 will now perform a power clean.
Candidate number 1, what are the rep ranges for power training?
1 to 2 reps.
What are the percentage 1RM for power training?
90 to 100%.
Candidate number 1, can you specify what a 1RM is?
One repetition maximum.
Thank you, candidate number 1. Candidate number 2, what are the repetition ranges for strength training?
4 to 6 or even 2 to 4.
Thank you. And at what percentage of 1RM?
80 to 90 or 80 to 95.
Thank you. Candidate number 1, what are the repetition ranges for hypertrophy training?
8 to 12 reps.
At what percentage of 1RM?
70 to 80%.
Thank you. Candidate number 2, what are the rep ranges for endurance training?
15 to 20.
At what percentage of 1RM?
40 to 60.
Thank you.